It's March 2020. Some of you may know Knights Beach is taking me to court over defamatory statements, one of which was the term deck envy, taken from a skit by Jeff Foxworthy called Big Deck. Watch it, it's funny as heck. They didn't like, they took offense to my referring to them as having deck envy. It was just trying to keep a little humor into these videos, because there's nothing really very funny about any of this, but that was the thinking. So hi again, folks. It's been a while. I apologize. Talking about Knights Beach, our friends down on the shores of Lake Erie. The subject, of course, is the decks on the waterfront properties, the storms from last October and the destruction that they caused, and what's going to be done about it, or what can be done about it. So at this point, decks, no matter how big or small, are a hot point to talk about down at Knights Beach. These, the waterfront decks, of course, have all tumbled down and fallen apart. This is going to be a big subject. We're going to talk about this quite a bit, but today, let's just scratch the surface today, talking about the destruction of the decks and what you can do about it. Or, more importantly, what you can't do about it. That's the sad part of all this. You're not going to like me for this one. So as you're all well aware, the damage to the waterfront properties is extensive enough to get the building department involved. That's a whole different subject. We'll come back to that one another time. It would be a normal assumption that your insurance company would take care of you for all the damage that's happened here, but as you've found out, that's not the case. One of the things I'm going to bring up to you is the fact that all these decks, they're not legal in the first place, so your insurance wouldn't cover it no matter what the damage was. If it were, I don't know, a fire, say one of your neighbors was having a campfire and it got carried away and it burnt your deck down, your insurance would probably cover something like that. The thing is, the decks themselves aren't legal. So the insurance company is bound to come along and say, no, we're not covering that because it's not a legal item. You also might think maybe Knights Beach should be responsible for the repairs, or at least some of the repairs. But as you're going to find out, that's not the case either. It clearly states in your 2020 contract, and I don't want anybody suing me here, so I'm going to read off this piece of paper. I'm quoting exactly from your contract. Decks provided for you on your site are the property of Knights Beach Resort and cannot be moved or removed from the park. So that statement could make you feel like maybe Knights Beach, if they own the decks, maybe they should be taking care of the repairs. But it also says in your contract that you're responsible for the maintenance, and that's the clause they'll use. They'll say, no, we're not repairing your decks. You have to maintain them. Yeah, there are decks, but you have to maintain them as long as you're the tenant. So that's not going to help you too much either. So maybe you'll just give up. Throw your hands in the air and say, you know what, I'll fix it myself. That's not going to be an option for you either. Let me explain why. That's the first reality you have to come to grips with. Your decks aren't legal. So it's not just a simple matter of getting the hammer and saw out and putting them back together again. It doesn't work that way. It could have, illegally of course, but it could have if the building department wasn't involved. But somebody called the building department and now they are involved and you have no way around it. You're going to be inspected. If you try to put your deck back together again without proper permission, they're going to come and take it down. They'll tear it down on you. So that's not going to work. You can't do that. You're going to have to do it through a legal process. So let's see what that legal process is. So the first step in the process is you need to go to the Long Point Conservation Authority. Now I know you can say, well, we'll get together as a group and do it or whatever, and that's fine. So whether you're doing it as an individual or a group, this is the process. You go to the Conservation Authority to get permission to build your deck. Now, to get that permission from them, you have to have written permission from the Wassermans first. Let's just pretend the Wassermans are going to give you that permission. And let's say when you go to Long Point Conservation that they say, yes, you can rebuild your deck since you have permission. So now you have permission from Long Point, paper in your hand. That's the biggest hurdle you've overcome now. So now with that permission in hand from Long Point, off you go to the building department at Haldeman. Nice folks, by the way, I've spoken with them. You've got a plan in hand of what your deck is going to look like and making it all legal and so on and so forth. So let's say that's all in order, and the good folks over there give you a permit. 2 hurdles overcome now. Back to the park you go. All this paperwork in hand, ready to build your new deck. The province of Ontario works with the Ontario Building Code. All the counties and regions have to use that building code. The simple fact is that if any part of your deck is more than 2 feet over the ground, then the deck has to sit on a proper well, first off, it needs a building permit. It has to sit on a proper foundation and it has to have proper railings on it for safety factor. Okay, that's all good stuff. Even if most of your deck is right down flush with the grass, but there's one little part that's 2 feet over, like over towards the beach side, you're going to need a permit. If your deck touches the trailer or is fastened to the trailer in any way whatsoever, you need a permit. There's a number of rules. We can go on and on all day, but the bottom line is you're going to need a permit for it. So let's say we've gone through all this rigmarole and people are going to let you build this deck. You're going to show up at Knights Beach with all the equipment you need to start digging proper foundations, because that's what your deck needs. And Marlene and Edward are going to come over and say to you, what the heck are you doing? You can't dig here. You can't dig holes. You can't pour cement. It's written right in your contract. You can't do it. So now you've got all these permissions in hand. You've gone to all this trouble. I'm not thinking that you won't do your homework. I know you won't go to all that trouble. Jump to the end. You can't build a deck because the deck needs a foundation. The foundation can't be built. It's against the rules of the park. Now we could look at some of the other rules. I don't believe Long Point Conservation Authority is going to allow you to build a deck that close to the water. I think Long Point Conservation might just tell Knights Beach all trailers need to be pulled back some distance from the water's edge where they are now, and that all the sewer lines are probably in there illegally, and they're not going to allow the sewer lines to stay that close to the waterfront either. I know where my friend's trailer was, the sewer line would only be about 50 feet away from the crest edge, which would only put it probably 30 feet from the high water edge, and I don't believe that's legal. This is getting very technical, and I apologize for that, but that's the rules. I think what you're going to see is a big mashup here where the whole waterfront section is going to be removed. That's my guess. I'm just guessing. If I'm wrong, you can all laugh at me later. Something I noticed down at the park, and of course I was only there for a few weeks, but there's a bit of a, I'm trying to say this politely, but you guys have created a bit of a class section, kind of the waterfront folks versus the non-waterfront folks. And in this battle, I think you guys need to all get together. The folks who are off the water in the park feel like they're not affected by any of this. It's not a problem for them. Their decks didn't get destroyed in the storms and so on and so forth. But let's not forget, in the 2020 contract, if any of those people have a deck that requires a building permit, if it's more than 2 feet over the ground, now it's less likely in there because it's a fairly flat site. But I have seen some decks that are elevated up by the trailers, and all those decks needed to be built with permits. So all those people, if their decks are too large, will have to take them down because that's the rules of the park. If they required a permit, that's a whole different ballgame. They're going to have to get that sorted out with the County of Haldimand. And then there's the sheds. New rule about the sheds, new rule about patio stones, gazebos, and so on and so forth. All these new rules right now are being overshadowed by the storm damage, but all the new rules for 2020 that were put in place before the storm damage happened apply to all the people throughout the entire park. So you guys really need to band together. You shouldn't be separating yourselves for different purposes, waterfront from non-waterfront. Not a good idea. You need to work together. Now, with that said about the off-water tenants, I'm going to make a speculation here. If I'm correct in the way I think Knights Beach wants to reinvent itself, I don't think they want to alienate the tenants who are off the water this year anyway. I think they're going to want to stay friendly with those guys because right now they're going to be the bread and butter as far as paying rent. If everything goes south with the waterfront tenants, they probably already got your rent for this year, but likely won't be getting it for next year. So they're going to want to stay friendly with all the folks in the middle of the park. So I would speculate they'll do it this way. They're going to wipe out the waterfront because Mother Nature did that for them. The storms of October, in my opinion, are a huge bonus to the Wasserman, helping them move ahead with their plan. I think the next step then, number 2, is going to be to install the new trailers, like I've said in some of the other videos, much like Shirkston Shores, and concentrate on weekly rentals. And get those built, get them in place, concentrate on getting the book full for July and August to get the income coming in. In the meantime, like I said, stay friendly with all the folks who are off the water, guaranteed income. With all that done, and the income coming in from the waterfront yet again, let's move on to rule number 4. Go after the off-water tenants and enforce all those new rules that were brought in 2020. I'm thinking 2021 that they'll be doing that. I don't think it'll happen this year. I think next year is when they'll be doing that. And finally, because the park has now been improved so much with these new waterfront units and the weekly rentals and the petting zoo and whatever else it is they're going to build down there, raise the rent for the folks who are not on the water. Now, another point I want to make, beyond the waterfront trailers, is the building department is fully involved in the park now. I get the impression that the park has been warned in the past about the infractions going on there. So when the building department comes back to inspect the waterfront, the deck removals and so on, I think at that point you're also going to see them starting to condemn properties or prohibit occupancy, let's put it that way, for other infractions, not just for the decks, but it's going to start happening for the attic rooms and so on, because those again are all structures that have been put up without building permits. And this could apply not just to the waterfront homes again, we're talking about all the trailers in the park. There's attic rooms and structures in lots of areas. So ask yourselves, has Marlene done anything to help you sort this out? Now, I understand you have a meeting coming up with Marlene in Long Point. I'd be really interested to hear what happens with that. Hopefully somebody will let me know. I'm going to speculate, but I think what's going to happen is Long Point is going to tell you that the structures along the water just can't be there, whether it's decks or trailers or whatever. It's the rules. That's what we do in Ontario to preserve the waterfront. I think when they say that, Marlene's just going to shrug her shoulders and say, sorry, it's out of my control. That way, Marlene gets to make the Conservation Authority be the bad guy, and she doesn't have to. What about Edward? Has he done anything to smooth this over? He's the president of the park. Has he gone to Long Point and said, please help my tenants out? Please get down here and sort this out for me. Have they done that? What about Marvin? Did Marvin go down to the building department and say, come on, help these people out. They're really good people. They're my tenants. I love them. Please come and help them out. I don't think he did that at all. No. What about David? What's he up to? I read a statement by someone who said that the park staff had been working really hard to shore up the shoreline, piling the sand and so on to stop any further damage. And they felt that this was a wonderful thing that they'd done, working so hard to protect their trailers. And I've got to tell you, they're doing it to protect their shoreline. Any shoreline that erodes and falls into the lake, that's just lost property. The further the shoreline comes back, the less property they have. Also, the setbacks change. They would have to move all the facilities further back. It could cost them a fortune. At this point in time, the best spent money would be putting in a proper stone break wall. That's what they should be doing. They should be putting in a proper stone break wall or a proper break wall of one form or another. And I think you'll see them start doing that. But I think that's going to be part of the reinvention of the park. It's the reality of the shores on the Great Lakes. I'm here on Lake Ontario today. It is just a normal day. The waves pounding away at the shoreline. It's the new reality with the higher water heights. They don't seem to be receding. The experts say they're going to stay high for some time now, if not indefinitely. Watch your backs, guys. Any promises that are made to you by the park staff, get it in writing. Verbal promises are gullible customers. I found that out the hard way. Best of luck to all of you. Thanks for watching again. We're going to help sort this out one way or another.
What you saying, what you saying